Good evening, folks. Welcome to this week's Joko conversation. I am Brother Youssef, a member of the Joko, a cultural worker, educator, um, poet, professor, and I am joined by my wonderful and brilliant colleague, comrade, and partner, Tasha. Hi, Tasha.
Hi, Yusuf, and greetings, our small but mighty family of listeners and viewers. Welcome back to another Joko conversation, and we're going to take a few opportunities to keep you reminded throughout the program to like us if you like our conversation, subscribe if you think our contribution is worth it, and comment. Give us some comments. Share. We're going to share at the end and join the conversation. That's always great when we get some folks
Mhm.
popping in and popping on and putting in their 2 cents,
Mhm.
because it's very much about a commitment to dialogic process and deliberation and digging we intend into the subjects that we tackle. And so, beginning as we always do, with an acknowledgement of the ancestors of our personal lineage, um, whose direct whose direct activity we emerge, our um, collection of life experiences, all of these things that make us into the people that we are, and make us into the people that e- uplift the value of justice, right? Truth, resistance, right? That make us Black revolutionary, Black radical people interested and committed to um, the liberation of African peoples and all oppressed peoples of the planet. We take the time to acknowledge, as we are members of the African global family, those great souls whose names we know, and some names we know, and many names we don't know, who contributed to that forward movement and to that push back against the atrocious and ignoble regimes that have mired and immiserated the peoples of the planet through the operations of capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, misogyny, sexisms, racisms, all of the things, right, that bring us to the table to uh, to make this push back. And absolutely, there have been great thinkers, creators, innovators, organizers, generals who, as members of the African global family, that have contributed to this work. And we never forget and always remember that any work that we are doing, as we do it anywhere in the so called United States or so called America, we do on the unceded territories of First Nations people whose continue to be preserved, whose languages continue to be preserved and maintained, who fight assiduously to protect Mother Earth, and the non human relations of the natural world, and forefront the interactivity, and who have in no ways been eradicated, right? The genocidal campaign, though effective, though depressing, was actually not successful despite the myth. And we recognize that. And we know that it's at their hospitality and the hospitality of their ancestors that we do this work. And having said all of that, right, so tonight it is upon me to kind of guide our conversation, and be so pleased to engage with these two brilliant folk, my dear Yusuf and our dear brother, Matsemela Odom. We'll be joined by Matsemela Odom, and I'm going to do an introduction of Brother Matsemela before I do an introduction of our topic. Dr. Matsemela Odom is the international president of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, or INPEDM, and the Black is Back Coalition Steering Committee member. He is a Black Studies educator at San Diego State University and other schools, including San Diego City College and San Diego Mesa College. Odom has published numerous articles on the history of Black people throughout Southern California, analyzing the civil rights and Black power movements, police brutality, segregation, the crack cocaine epidemic, hip hop music, and Black resistance. And sometime last month, Brother Matsamala and I actually there was a one of those butt calls. his phone accidentally called my phone, and we launched into a fiery half an hour of discussion that we promised that we were definitely going to get back to. And that discussion we want to actually expand into a series of discussions with some folks that we've talked with over our time doing Joko and Joko conversations. And tonight, and it's a discussion about our approaches to political education. Um, and what it is we're seeking to achieve. And in fact, our discussion tonight is taking us back to some of our Joko roots, right? Inquiring into practices that allow us to become the most powerful thinkers that we can be, right? Let me look back into my notes so that I can say what I intended to say here. Okay. The title of our program, which is indicative: The Limits of Political Dogma and the Power of Ideological Dexterity. The limits of political dogma and the power of ideological dexterity, because it, if I remember correctly, our little jump off in conversation started with Brother Matsamala saying something like, well, sister, it's the political education is, and of course I'm paraphrasing because I have no perfect memory. Political education is, very dynamic, very important, and of course, organizations are, have done very well, but at times it's kind of limited. At times it's kind of not responsive to the moment. At times, in essence, needs some interrogating itself, you know, our approach to analyzing um, uh, that our tools of analysis have to be uh, capable, have the capacity to respond effectively to dynamic conditions. And so we've used this term dogma in our title, a term formally connected to religious practice, right? And the issue of religiosity in Joko is a big one. We always return to the issue of religiosity, by which we mean the tendency to cling to a set of unexamined ideas, which are meant to kind of explain all things, and from to which we cling from a basis of emotionalism and attachment rather than um, critical awareness, right? We start off in Joko with the sense that there is a serious issue in our general communities and our general um, um, exchanges with a a failure of critical awareness. We're kind of losing our conceptual agility, right? Um, and so I want to start with a question for you all.
Well, hold on. Shall
Yeah.
we bring him on?
Oh, I thought you already brought the brother
No,
on.
no, no. You're not. I didn't know if you could see that. I guess you couldn't.
I couldn't because I'm
Yes. Okay.
looking at the notes on another page. And Brother Matsemela is on now.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Brother Matsemela. I'm
Hey,
just
horror, horror.
guru, just thinking you're there and
I
talking
was in the
away.
back. I could hear. I saw everything.
Okay, good, good, good. So yeah, so this religiosity thing, this dogma thing, inhibits the imaginary, inhibits the imagination, inhibits the logic, right? Stymies logic, defies logic often, right? Um, and it just kind of, what does it do? It shrinks the natural expansiveness of the intellectual process, right? So I wanted to start by asking you all what concepts in radical political analysis do you see tending to be dogmatized over time? And what is it that, these ideas that are cycled and recycled and much recited, but are kind of losing their critical edge? And let me ask our guests to start with that.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily dogmatized, but I do think that the central sort of dialectical method. I think this is what we kind of got towards even our own conversation was the way through which and sometimes I use the word dialectics because of course we are communicating right now in the in a colonial language, right? Not the language of our ancestors, and the way in which they come to uh, identify dialectics,
Mhm,
which has to do with sort of like coming to an understanding by way of examining like opposing forces, right? I'm reluctant to say that because I mean, then people, dialectics doesn't begin with George Hegel or anyone like that or Karl Marx. The understanding of the world through a variety of opposing forces um, is central to the African worldview.
absolutely.
I mean, even in those groups, even in those things that people might call African deities or something like that, which really is once again just a Western way of understanding the sort of sciences and the philosophy of life that African people have. There's always sort of a duality, either in the individual deities or whatever, Orishas, Vodun, or whatever they might be called throughout the African continent. But this idea that sort of opposing forces is central to the African worldview, and so I do think that one thing that has happened uh, is especially, and maybe it's not new, but I do think it's a crisis. Is the move away from sort of any dialectical thought, and I do think that it's been intentionally sort of by way in the last couple of years by way of social media's algorithm have targeted African people to way through which a certain level of dialectical reasoning has been abandoned in replace of a sort of a subjectivism in which people go and search things because it feels right or that's what they've already always seen uh,
Mhm,
things like that.
mhm,
That has because and in that sense, like research or evidence is just
mhm,
things that sort of reinforce positions that people already came to,
Absolutely.
And that would be called the research, right? So that's even called the research. I researched it, you know. That's not research. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's I guess it's a form of excavation or something like that, but it's not what we would understand as research, and it's not some bourgeois thing to demand that people sort of scientifically assess the ideas that they come through, because those
Mm-hmm.
things are that's as African as sweet potato pie, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. How would you respond to that same question, Yusuf? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that Matsemela nailed it with it's the lack of dialectical thinking, and in terms of any particular political approach or dogma, all of them are susceptible to it. Um, to falling into these sort of categorical thinking or something, or again, not thinking dialectically, not reading conditions as they are, right? Recognizing that things are life, human society is dynamic. Things are always changing, conditions are always changing, and I think that's what um, we're trying to get at with the idea of ideological dexterity, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's not that one is not grounded in a particular ideology, right? And a revolutionary ideology. If the condition of the world needs to be changed, all right. So we take that as a fundamental, right? The condition of the world, the relations in the world need to be changed. And dialectical thinking it should be attendant, right, to the dynamism of the moment, right, and what it calls for, and any political tendency can fall into patterns, right? Patterns of behavior, patterns of thought, um, kind of ready-made response to a situation, um, instead of taking it on its own merit, so to speak, any moment, but within from an ideological grounding, right? But again,
Mm-hmm.
it's the folks who are making these what is it a priori conclusions, and then finding the research that's going to confirm their conclusion. And isn't that part of isn't that the meaning of the what is it um, confirmation bias, something?
Confirmation bias. Yes. Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how do we popularize, so way of thinking of it, a way of doing critical research, right? And um, something that whatever you're finding, you're evaluating, right, and you're looking for corroboration, and um, before you can actually call it research, um,
Mm-hmm.
what understanding history, not because you're looking for history to repeat, but to understand the processes that bring us to this point, right? Um, so we're kind of dealing with a lot of mythic thinking right now, and for me, that's always it's an interesting place to be as a poet, a writer, someone who appreciates the value of the mythic, right, and the imaginative, and even what that the importance of the imaginative to the scientific approach and scientific process. The But you can't mistake the mythic for science, right? For history, it's not it's not fact in that way. It's not. It's it's not truth in that way, right? It's there are other things there,
Mm-hmm.
and we are being, folks have been trained really for a very long time to read the mythic literally,
Mm-hmm.
and have lost the skill to
Mm-hmm.
read allegorically, right? To read typologically, to and even to ask the questions of where do these various stories come from.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
which talked about going back to the um, early Joko, and that idea, right? Where what that source criticism, where are these stories, where are the ideas coming from? Asking that question. When you're doing the research, who is this you're reading, and what's
Mm-hmm.
their interest, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so all those kinds of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
For people to learn to ask questions and indeed to be skeptical. Because as Matsemela said, right, certainly the modern West has no
Mm-hmm.
monopoly on skepticism. As that tradition is found in all of the wisdom traditions and knowledge traditions of peoples everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And in there are a few pieces that stand out. Of course, there's so much. One of which, even as we're talking about, say, um, the tendency toward the mythic, right? If human beings in general, right, we tend to weave stories, right?
Mm-hmm,
As part of the thinking process, right?
mm-hmm,
As part of the knowledge making process. We
mm-hmm,
accumulate some information, we weave it into our overall story, right? Of the world, of all that we will go forward to encounter, right? We weave it in, right? I think that's how we function, right? So that implies that there's like kind of a periodic uh, uh, threshing, a periodic, as part of an intellectual discipline, as part of an intellectual. I had a friend who used to call it intellectual hygiene, right?
mm-hmm,
Periodically, you got to take it all in and check it all out. Bill Witherstone, right? Can't the One of these pitfalls of dogmatism is resting on intellectual laurels, it would appear, right? So we have a lot of isms and schisms and analytical tools, but this tendency to get caught in that verbiage and to simply repeat the exercise of viewing dynamics through that particular set of tools. And then when we come across something that actually doesn't quite fit the lens, we just find some way to reduce, right, this problem of reductiveness, to reduce what we see to our phenomena, whether that is, and I think the old school Marxists get accused of this a lot. Oh, it's a doctrinaire, old school Marxist. Everything is going to be right, a class struggle, uh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Um, so says to me, and Matsemela started with the dynamism of other than the dynamism of traditional thought. And anyone who has explored that from a time to time, from as a position of a student, a position of a practitioner, right? A position of, have you if not thrown Odu, have you visited a priest? Have you gotten a reading? Have you attempted to fulfill the reading? Have you read the parables? And have you then observed phenomena as you go through that process over a period of time so that you can then come back and have something articulable to say about that process? And as a person who fits that description, right? And actually whose much of my intellectual sensibility has been shaped in the practice of these non-Western practices. And not only is there a binary, but there's a multiplicity, right? The way I've long been interested in exploring the ways in which the traditional thought paradigms, those modes, the way the capacity they have to explain, to do this task that we're talking about of explaining complex phenomena, right? And all of that doesn't mean that we're speaking of the world necessarily as practitioners of this tradition, but that there is some kind of intellectual bridge, right, to be built, some kind of conceptual bridge to be built into that conversation that will allow us to um, reach beyond what are, and there's nothing wrong with the isms and schisms that are in use. They explain a whole lot of phenomena. They have that explanatory force. Yeah. But to even be able to go beyond. And so I'm going to take this to an example, right? This conversation about opposing forces and the ever constant, representation of that we can observe in human wisdom traditions. There's, what has become popular in uh, in thinking in contemporary times is this question of the binary, the limits of binary thinking, the limits of the concepts of poles, like kind of this notion that there are absolute poles in conflict with each other, and rather, right, looking at phenomena through a spectrum, right? Clearly, I'm referring to an approach popularized by uh, folks who are talking about gender fluidity and issues of heteronormativity and these kinds of things. But what attracted me kind of to that thinking was my basis in African thinking, in quite a bit of Buddhist thinking, and etc., that is able to view, right, the complexity of phenomena in its interplay, right? Such that, right, there's this notion that the poles are just kind of reference points, non-existent in their reality. There's nothing that is wholly black and wholly white. There's nothing that is wholly female, wholly male. There's not, right? And just that right there, if we were actually able to absorb that kind of conceptualization, that the rule of nature is diversity, what would that do to our concepts of human inclusivity? What is that? How does that, wake up and break up beyond, right, discussions of racism, racism, etc., in any of those kinds of polls? So the last thing that I actually want to insert about intellectual agility, going back to, one of my favorite quotes, and uh, again back to our kind of our Joko roots in the instructions of Ptah to his son, that we love from our ancestors in Kemet, where he says the limits of knowledge have never been set, nor has anyone ever reached them. I've started wrong. I got to go back. It starts, be not arrogant because of your knowledge. Um, the limits of knowledge have never been set, nor has any man ever reached them. Knowledge is as rare as emeralds, and yet it can be found among the women that gather at the grindstone. And then there's also an admonition to take counsel with the ignorant as well as the wise, right? But the fundamental concept that the limits of knowledge have never been set, right, defines this kind of fundamental intellectual attitude. And how do we begin to tell that story, popularize that modality of 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 being, which is what we're talking about, this problem of dogma tonight, but we hope to stretch out a series over, exploring these questions and looking at what a dynamic and radical political education system looks like, might look like. Um, so what I actually would like you guys, well, actually, is there anything you want to throw in before I kind of go on to some other question?
Yeah, well, one thing I would like to say is that I think it's important to note that, see, dogma is not principle. We're not sort of going against principles, right? That's why I appreciate what Brother Yusuf had to say as well, because when he was speaking, I was thinking about my training when I played football, right? I played on the defense, but I know the offense would script a set of plays, and no matter what happened, they would work through that script of plays. You could have the first play can go for 100 yards or 99 yards, right? But they're still going to do play number two. But the reason why you're working through those plays is so that you can prepare yourself for the rest of the game, for what comes after that, right? So to be grounded is not dogma, right? And oftentimes, people who are critical of any form of grounding will say, "Oh, that's just that dogma." Even African internationalists might get it. Oh, you can't do this, you can't do nothing without citing Chairman O'Malley and all this other stuff. Well, yeah, I mean, because that's our grounding in our ideological philosophy is African internationalism, and the architect of that is Chairman O'Malley Yeshitela. But that don't mean, but African internationalism gives me a lens to which I can sort of assess the things throughout the world. And I can bring in other people and things like that as well, but you're not going to knock me off of my deen. You're not going to knock me out of my stance that I'm maneuvering from, which is my groundedness, right? So I feel like that's important to note that, like, being grounded is not dogma, but this sort of religious belief to that, after them 10 plays, after you run through that script, we just gonna keep doing this, and then maybe look. Well, we already tried to run the dive up the middle, and we got stopped for 3 yards. We did that 3 times already. Maybe we should try a triple option. If anybody knows football, okay. Well, you fake the dive up the middle, and then sort of either give it to another back or run with it, right? Because that's what lets you set up. Now that's dialectics, right? That's not simply just some unscientific attachment to something you had been taught, and so the center of all political education needs to center the process of dialectics, because anything outside of that is just really just sort of idealist imaginations.
Mm-hmm.
And I once again, idealism in the political sense that I'm talking about is not having ideals, right? Like, or even being, so having ideals are a good thing. They're all things
Mm-hmm.
we strive towards. But the question is how we're going to achieve those. So I just wanted to say that sort of, dogma is not, so I appreciate this conversation, that sort of having principles is good, right? And those principles should ground you in how you enter into the world. But those principles have to be grounded in a scientific understanding of the world. We talked about cynicism.
Mm-hmm.
I really came to this understanding that cynicism is really like, cynicism arises when, like, skepticism in the face of science and rejection of science, right? So skepticism is absolutely good. Skepticism can direct us towards science, and I think that sort of people's own lived experience can be the
Mm-hmm.
original basis of to be skeptical about something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get me into a room full of a whole bunch of colonizers, and I'm gonna be skeptical.
Yes.
You know, so I'm like, I don't know what's going on here,
Hmm.
but that's going to force me to investigate. And then through
Mhm.
my investigation, I said, "Oh, wait a minute. These are all comrades grounded in a similar ideology that I have. Now I can move through this world, but or something like that. So skepticism, but cynicism. And what's really happened is that um, people have preyed on the skepticism of
Yeah.
people, and it's really become cynicism. I saw this guy Lord Jamar recently talk about the whole flat Earth thing, and it's just
Hmm.
so ridiculous. I mean, he's going to ask the question, well, if the Earth wasn't flat, how come we're not falling into outer space? You mean this is a ball and we're not falling in outer space? I'm
Mhm.
like, gravity. Like, how do we even have to debate this? You know what I mean? And to be honest, but so increasingly, I feel like I just got to reject this. But
Yeah.
then I think the purpose of my conversation with you is like, I sit back and realize, dang, I thought that just by not acknowledging some of this ridiculousness that's floating around, spaceships,
Mhm.
Hmm.
a,
Right.
a, a mosque
Reptilians. Mhm.
in the mosque inside the caves of
Hmm.
the with the Grand Canyon. We the real indigenous people who
All
walked
this.
over
Yes.
here
Yes.
during Pangea. I tell people, how the heck you walk during how was humans arrived during Pangea and you can't even withstand a 2.0 earthquake?
Mhm.
2.0
Mhm.
earthquake got you shaking on the ground, crying and praying.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, but you could withstand the complete tectonic shift of the plates of Earth. Come on, man, that don't even make no sense.
Hmm.
But in the world where it only has to make sense to you, then it does.
Well, it's a combination of things. It is this part where it is a part where this notion of my truth, your truth, the lack of the
Oh,
loss of the right of the common
Yeah.
reference
There can be
of
agreed
actual
upon
accuracy.
truth and facts. Yeah.
Right. Common references for the real, right?
Yeah.
And there's this component, this really, really important component of the actual lack of distribution, of appropriate distribution of certain through a public education system, right?
Hmm.
A lack of appropriate distribution of these core, core basic accumulated human knowledge to this time. Some that right, the core basic understandings. So yeah, there's a
I mean,
conversation.
without a doubt, counterinsurgency. It's
Yeah.
Say
without a
that
doubt
again.
counterinsurgency. Because the
Count.
role of
Yeah.
counterinsurgency
Exactly.
is to sort of redirect the masses towards
Exactly.
towards towards another truth, another way of being,
Exactly.
and things like that. So without a doubt, I mean, I just heard some round. I don't even want to say their name, but like they had a whole supposed podcast that was pitting Africans against indigenous people, and
Mm-hmm.
once I finally listened to it, it
Mm-hmm.
had to do with like who created zoot suits and lowriders, and it was
Mm-hmm.
supposedly it was
Mm-hmm.
somebody out of LA who used to make pimp books and pimp movies, and now he supposedly makes history movies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
uh, and lives in Chattanooga, the same place where they make adult films. He makes his documentary supposedly about Africa.
Okay.
But
Mm-hmm.
so this person, um, and I started listening to it. I was like, that's not really a Mexican talking. That was like some sort of AI interface,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
probably somebody else, or maybe something
Mm-hmm.
they recorded
Mm-hmm.
themselves. It sounded like the
Hmm.
host himself going through some sort of AI to make him sound like a stereotypical Mexican,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
just so he could like
Mm-hmm.
stoke this ridiculous
Yeah.
argument that pitted Africans versus Mexican people. But like, let's make and say this isn't just entertainment, right? I'm like, this
No,
dude is
like
doing it
you
for
named it.
actual
It's
real political
counterinsurgency.
purpose.
Well,
Real
That's
and
counter.
there's
that's what it is. Yeah.
and part of the things that that there's opportunities for to insert counterinsurgent narratives and things to capitalize on in terms in the field of folks' lack of fundamental understanding, because I want to draw back to that a few steps in terms of what has failed to be distributed, right? Are these core understandings, come basic understandings. People no longer understand or are properly taught a concept of gravity that would make the notion, right, that would take us be able to um, insert some light into this conversation about flat Earth, right?
Hmm.
A fundamental historical understandings and the uh, heretofore, what I would say, the belief in the set of experts, as Yusuf, you always like to talk about the loss of faith and expertise,
Well,
a belief
expertise has come
in.
under attack, though, right? I mean, again, it's part of expertise has been undermined through these kinds of narratives, and through that spreading of, as you were saying, Matsemela, that move from skepticism to cynicism. Um,
Right.
and you know, there are many different ways and areas, but you know that skepticism is, or that undermining of expertise has been, um, you know, one of these tactics of counterinsurgency, and you know, so certainly a targeted counterinsurgency against African population, other colonized populations, but the counterinsurgency against the working class in general, though, right? And part of
Right.
which is, um, you know, basic scientific information, facts. Um, you know, these are the effects of 40 years of intense attack on public education, and the insertion for, you know, for how many years has it been controversy, um, teaching evolution versus creationism, right? Or getting creationism in the schools. And that's been at least a 20-year fight.
Mm.
So yeah, it's, you know,
Right. Well, that's so
point, right, where
that's
it's
so
all
interesting.
coming out. Say again.
That's an important point, because what's interesting, which actually happened, is the fact that, like, um, things that even white nationalists or the white right, or however people might clarify them before. I know that they're two wings of the same bird and stuff like that, but I do think that there's a sort of a reactionary sector, in the white community, that have been
Mhm.
kind of, for oftentimes, unsuccessful in pushing some of this stuff on their own people, who
Mhm.
in turn turned around and pushed this nonsense on us, you know.
Mhm. You know what?
Uh,
Mhm.
so I mean, all that sovereign, I think you were talking about this, Tasha, all
Absolutely.
the sovereign citizen thing and all
Yes.
that stuff, it largely was a failure, amongst their own community, and then they
Right.
pushed this stuff, on us.
Mhm.
I remember back when everybody was reading "Behold the Pale Horse" and all that
Yep.
stuff,
Yeah.
and you had to read this, you had to read this, and then read the people said, "Man, these people got some real questionable politics."
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
Well, there's no.
But they're
why?
just read as
Well,
opposition, right? And that's enough.
yeah.
That's
So
where. Yeah.
so
That's
so yeah
exactly where I
so
was
so
going to go.
so I felt, the sort of anti, and you kind of see it nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of see it reemerging. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting, because like, whenever they were, making the old, findings, the images of, y'all still there, the
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
images of
we
finding,
can hear you.
like ancient people in Europe, and they assumed that they were like light skinned. They always make them look like humans we
Mm-hmm.
exist nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Now, every time they find somebody and they say that the skin color was dark and the hair was coarse, they try to make them look like a monkey or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's like y'all not fooling nobody. But yeah, Not, like first they were showing Charter Man look like a human. Now Charter Man look like Rise of the Planet of the Apes or something like
Mm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to go back to some old real white nationalist stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean
Yes.
the sort of anti-science and the way to which
Yes.
anti-science has become almost, but in certain communities pro-black. I'm like, man, how the
Right.
hell did this happen? Because I just
Absolutely.
remember when I was taught we invented science.
Right.
Yeah, but you
Now
know
it's
what?
like,
There's a whole conversation to be reestablished. All of this vacuum and all of this kind of raising of the intellectual ground um, is creates this condition where we have to reestablish what do we mean by science. We can't,
Hmm.
even there is a
right,
taken for granted, right, set of notions and a failure. My position is that there's a whole other level of common knowledge that people need to be able to deal in relational power, right, kind of equity, given the complexities of contemporary times, a certain level
yeah,
of expertise,
yeah,
kind of knowledge, right? That wasn't heretofore something that was acquired, right? But
right,
this piece of what the common sense notion of when we say science, scientific, we don't know that. We need to relearn terms like, we need to learn terms like double blind study. We need to understand terms like like we were saying before, source criticism. That needs to be part of our common parlance. You know what I'm saying? That needs to be kitchen table talk in terms of what does the person, right? I don't want to use the term citizen, but what does the person need to know confronted, with all of these phenomena? What are the kind of core things that they need to know, and how do they need to know it? So when I say we have to go back and say, okay, so what do we mean by science, scientific approach, scientific thinking? I'm saying that to say it's that deep, right? There's such a loss of common agreement of what is real. And really, certainly Yusuf was about to talk about anything that reads as oppositional carries the merit of bringing some kind of truth, right? Because of our era of hidden, revealing, specifically revealing Egypt and Africa, putting Egypt back in Africa, revealing the sophistication of, and upending of African civilizations and cultures, and beginning to upend this era and influence of scientific racism, which is still seeded. That is the seeds of that. The belief systems, right, are still very much with the populations, right? So these ways of understandings of the world have but penetrated so deep. So it is
right,
actually not so difficult to come in and supplant these spurious narratives. All someone has to do is connect themselves to a logic, follow
Hmm.
a logical form. And if you aren't understanding that a logic is not enough for knowledge, right, and understanding, so I'm saying all that to say we have to also pull back into reteaching and rethinking. What do we mean by knowledge? What is it to
hmm,
know? What
Hmm.
that
right.
kind of depth penetration?
And even the role of intellectual activity, right? There's an article, and maybe if I can share it in the chat. It's called "The Role of the African Intellectual in the
Mm-hmm.
World,"
Mm-hmm.
by Louise Kinshasa, um, uh, from the Burning Spear, and and in it, Loisy lays out the fact that the role of intellectuals in any given society is to help solve the issues of production in that given to society, right? It's not just to say some deep stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
Some stuff that, because you talked about essentially being grounded earlier. I think it was you or Brother Yusuf talked about this concept of being grounded, which really made me think about Walter Rodney. What better sort of thinker can we think of that left us too early than people like Walter Rodney, whose groundings with my brothers. But his
Mm-hmm.
idea of grounding wasn't an opportunistic sort of like, I'm gonna be with the rosters and whatever y'all say is correct, cause y'all the real. No, it was like, I'm gonna reason with y'all, I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna understand, but I'm gonna also criticize with love and try to pull you all to a more advanced position, and things like that, because he took serious the role of a revolutionary intellectual in the struggle, not just placating
Yes.
to the organic knowledge of the community. And
Mm-hmm.
the truth is,
Yes.
global movement for African liberation is better for that. I mean, in my classes, we begin all my Black Studies classes with a segment where we read the role of African intellectuals in the world, and we read Walter Rodney's African History in the Service of Black Liberation, which is like I think the last chapter in Groundings with my brothers, because I really love the way which he looks at African history, and I tell my students, look, we got 16 weeks. I
Mm.
wish I had ears. There's a lot of cool stuff, great stuff about African history, but we're not going to get into all of it in this
Right.
class. That don't mean that you can't learn it somewhere else, like how to write your name in hieroglyphics. Like, I'm not against that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but Walter Rodney's asking questions like, to what end are we understanding anything? He goes back and he says,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna look at ancient African society. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but let's look. But the reason I want to look back there is so you understand that sort of the future we trying to build. There's a historical precedent towards it in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and the basis of that was because they emerged out of a different social system through which people. That's why, if you notice, people can't even wrap their mind around how certain things were done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of admitting, okay, but see, knowledge arises from our relationship with the natural world around us. These
Mm-hmm.
people were scientifically driven towards other things, some of which we can't understand, but some of which sort of this certain social system won't let us understand or quite grasp, because the end result is, so instead what they'll get is, aliens did it, which is
Right.
just ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, I thought it was ridiculous, and I
Like
mean,
a
I
new
know it's,
religion.
yeah, and I think that's the other part. We basically saying, it's not just a new religion. In many ways, it's even worse, because
Mm-hmm.
because I think sort of the entry into even religion comes with the sort of superstitious sort of attachment to it, right? At least I understand. I'm walking into this with the sheer understanding that, like, I'm committing myself to
Mm-hmm.
sort of the world of unknown. But this is. I made a post recently, and some people disagree with me. I said that I found that in certain situations, people we might call religious are more dialectical than people we call political.
This is
Oh,
a
Because
absolutely.
I've
this
noticed that a religious person will go out there and study a lot about other things, at the very least, to say, okay, I need to engage with this if I'm going to win
yeah,
this, or something
exactly.
like that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
say this, we believe that. You
Yeah.
know, and
Exactly.
that's a dialectical process. I'm not saying that sort of
Mm-hmm.
the religious formations are dialectical materialist formations, but that's dialectical
That's a
process.
dialectical
Uh,
process, though, that they
right,
engage
right,
with.
right.
Yes.
But instead, sort of a politics of trust me, bro. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's so.
Yeah.
Sometimes we talk about the basis
Uh,
of political education, critical thinking, just a
critical
Yeah.
general basis of critical thinking,
Yeah.
historiography. Historiography is
Historiography.
absolutely important.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
Yes.
it was almost a decade ago. Somebody posted some stuff St. Patrick's Day around the fact that the original. And this is another thing we talked about, Sister Tasha.
Mm-hmm.
The original uh, 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 that leprechauns really did exist,
Right.
and that they were African twa pygmies
Mm-hmm.
Right.
with magic powers, and they could fly. And
Right.
which to me, anytime I hear that, it just doesn't. I'm like, why didn't they fly off the slave ships?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't
Mm-hmm.
understand this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, so now I have to prove, like, how is this even because clearly they were closer to whatever this magic. I can understand why I can't fly, but why couldn't the people from
Right,
tens of
right,
years ago fly if
If
right.
they could
these
fly
force
and disappear and all this other nonsense?
for
But
logical
then,
explanation.
what happened was I did some research. Just my general skepticism says this is ridiculous. But they showed a quote, and the quote
Right.
they shared was from some 19th century British folklorist who was a white
Mm-hmm.
supremacist,
Mm-hmm.
who's basically trying to attach Irish people to African people as a
Mm-hmm.
part of essentially a colonial project.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
African internationalism let me say, well,
Right.
what I mean, just the general skepticism of, hey, wait a minute, first off, this don't make no
Right.
sense. And then when I realized, okay, this is essentially a
Right.
British colonial making this whole nonsense up, I
Right.
know exactly what it's about.
Right.
But then now, as long as it's a book
Yes.
from the 1800s and it
Yes.
look real old, now I
Yes.
gotta continue with. I told this person, I was like, this is literally like you using Lord of the Rings as historical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different,
Of course,
you
there are
know.
people who will tell you that, the what they're hiding the truth in movies. That's another
Right.
possible
Yes, they will.
popular trope about knowledge in our community.
Uh,
You a
They're
we're
wise
hiding.
coming up
guy,
on 8 o'clock,
We are coming up
Natasha.
on 8
and
o'clock
we have to exercise clock discipline.
because we got to
Okay.
go to a different thing today. So it was a great beginning, but we do have these 3 minutes, so we're gonna fire them up and make them work. We're gonna fire them up and make them work. But yeah, those things, like you were saying, Matsemela, you were able because of the frame, the thought, the paradigm of African internationalism to recognize to put in place what the European folklorist was attempting to do, to right, to understand that politic and to understand what was being applied, right? So yes, right, we have what we would talk about in Joko as explanatory force, right? The explanatory force of a model of thought, right? Then you talked about another premise, right? Another basic principle, the exercising of skepticism. Like, okay, now this, what should appear to you to make sense and not make sense, and these kinds of things. And they're all kind of situated. It depends on where your paradigm is. And so there's something that y'all were talking about, the religious thinking often being more uh, dialectically sound, right, than other modalities. I certainly saw that doing classroom teaching. Kids coming from religious backgrounds or whatnot came in primed to deal with and to think about abstract concepts. You know what I'm saying? And also
Mhm.
came in primed to think about uh, uh, the notion of advancement, right? That there's somewhere to go, there's some good to do, there's something, right? And
Yeah,
that
yeah. That I mean, that actually takes us back actually to even the 18th century. I know we don't got much time, but the 18th century, in which the deep iron things don't exist in a vacuum, right? Sort of, we're all sort of contending with different social systems and different social forces and things like that. The deep irony is that in the 18th century, you had some people who we understand in the 21st century as religious idealists who actually had a better worldview, because at least they said that we all come from the same creator, and therefore have the same way forward. Should like need to struggle for broader humankind.
Mhm.
I'm not suggesting that sort of that's the way forward, but the point is that sort of us who believe in in politics, have to embrace a dialectical way of thinking, but and make that as and I think just a simple critical thinking and analysis and things like that, making that as fundamental part of our political education is absolutely important.
Yes,
Mhm.
and our general education.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
Like I said, and when I say
Yeah.
sort of basic,
Yeah.
what we might call basic, a general education
Hmm.
of the masses,
Hmm.
so that the masses can absolutely grip it.
Hmm.
Like that general skepticism, arming people with that general
That's
skepticism
right.
and
yeah.
having and having confidence in that, but then attaching that to some serious research. And just real quickly, I think that sort of informs how we even can produce things. CLR
Hmm.
was not perfect, but I really like that he told the story of the Haitian Revolution because
Hmm.
it was three parts. First part he did actually was produce a play starring Paul Robeson. The second part was a pamphlet, only 30 some odd pages, if I'm correct, called A History of Negro Revolt. And the fourth was like a 400-page masterpiece, Black Jacobins. Now, a
Hmm.
person that can read 30 pages could read 400 pages, but probably don't have the time. So he made sure that sort of he could and anybody could go to a play.
And
Uh,
anybody can go to a play. Yeah.
so,
Mhm.
so he made sure that that same story
Mhm.
could reach the masses of people
Hmm.
on three different levels. And to me, that's the sort of dialectical process of
Right.
production of knowledge.
And the work of the African intellectual right there, right?
Yes, right
Making
on,
it
right on.
accessible to the people.
Mhm.
One more thing, talking about that, that reactionary wing, and it's really, two wings of the same bird. The reactionary part of that bird is its beating heart. That's that's all I want to say. Most of the bird is reactionary,
Yes.
right? And it's, yeah,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
it's the wings that try to
For his
balance that out.
reaction.
Yeah, I
Each
love
part
being
is
on here.
beating with its full chest right now. So
Right.
anyway,
And
that'll be my closing comment. Go ahead, Tom.
closing comment. My closing comment is apologies to Malik, who put in some really nice kernels of conversation and reaction that we didn't get to integrate and integrate into the conversation and
Yes,
respond to. But Malik, you've got to come back and join
please
us
come back.
Oh
again so that we join
yeah,
the conversation.
Melita be
That's
there.
another.
Melita is an impediment organizer in Saint in Central Florida, Southern
All
Florida.
right.
Okay.
So
Greetings, greetings, greetings. Yeah, I took it. I took it as such. But this is
smart intellectual people out there. Oh,
Mhm.
another principle, another thing to key principle, and another thing to recognize is that the culture, the consumer culture, and the anti intellectual culture in America, right? You are get information delivered in sound bites and episodes and whatnot, and gone are the days where you have a sustained conversation over time. That was another one of our original principles that you got to deliberate a thing. There's things have too many parts. You're not going to get into uh, uh, a concept in a mere episode of visiting it. So we look forward to having some sustained dialogue around the topic. And yes, we are at 8:04. Brother Matsemala, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you back as we continue to develop this series around the topic of, how do we teach ourselves? What is this? What is the next innovation, right? In in teaching knowledge that we're going to generate in these times, and so I think those are my closing statements. Yusuf, you got something else?
No,
Mhm.
I want to, I'll go back to what you did at the beginning. Please subscribe to our Joko Collective channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, follow the Joko Collective or Tasha Thomas. Please like this video, help us with our little algorithm, help us reach 200 subscribers, and please share, right? And look for us again next Thursday. And another video that may go up between now and next Thursday. Yeah, that's all.
And that's it, Brother Matsemela. Your summary statement, your end statement.
Yeah, so I really look forward to this. I mean, I think, of course, we talk about the form of political education that's needed, just education that's needed. Joko, that's the raison d'etre, whatever they call it, right?
Right, raison d'etre.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's the
reason for
reason
being.
for Joko to exist.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I really appreciate being on Joko and just the role and purpose of it. And I put it in the chat, but if you can, join us in St. Louis, September 20th to 21st for the 20 for the annual convention of the International People's Democratic Horror Movement. We'll be talking about this and other things as well.
Excellent.
Right on.
Absolutely. All right.
Uhuru.
Uhuru, and I really appreciate time discipline because
Yeah.
Yes.
We
I'm
have to.
on the first weekend and all three of my classes on both days, then got out late. So.
All right. Yeah. Time discipline matters.
All right.
Indeed. You want to say good night, Tasha?
Good night, Tasha.
Good night, Tasha. And folks, I will end as I always do, talking about bringing religion and politics together with Bob Marley and the song Revolution. Revelation reveals the truth. Revolution, the only solution. Peace, y'all.